Welcome, board members, staff, and our general public. Call the meeting to order and do our initial business. Our Utah Highway Patrol member joining us today is Chris Horrocks. Always, I think, yes, grateful for having him here. Thank you. And in case of emergency use, the two west doors leading to the hallway will allow you to exit the building. So, start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and we've asked board member Carol Lear to lead us in that.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Member Lear. And we'll turn then to our board member message, which this month is our Finance Chair, Member Krista Norton.
Good morning, board members. I want to say happy Groundhog's Day to you all. That is not the reason I picked February as the month to do my board member message, but you know, it's a special day for all of us, I'm sure. While we are getting my presentation up, I chose to speak about our 16th President of the United States, President Abraham Lincoln, as we will be celebrating his birthday coming up here in about 10 days. So there's a lot of great things about Abraham Lincoln, and in my class, my students memorized the Gettysburg Address, and it's one of the more famous speeches in our nation's history, but I chose today, instead of the Gettysburg, I'm going to be discussing his second inaugural address. When President Lincoln was inaugurated, he was war-weary. This was the end of the Civil War. It was going to end in just a few weeks. And he had, during the entire 4 years of the war, had been visiting the battlegrounds very frequently. He was responding personally to the widows and mothers who had lost their children or who had had their spouse or their child arrested and put on trial for death, and with a possible death penalty for deserting. He was humble and often felt inadequate as a speaker. After he gave his second inaugural address, he had the occasion to meet up with Frederick Douglass, who was the prominent abolitionist leader in the country and a harsh critic of President Lincoln. And he told President Lincoln he felt that second inaugural address sounded more like a sermon than a state paper, and that he loved it. Next slide. The speech took place on March 4th, 1865, and this particular copy of it is printed in blue ink, and on the day of the inauguration, it was printed in blue ink. Unfortunately, just 6 weeks later, they changed that to black ink for all subsequent printings of the second inaugural address to symbolize that the president had been assassinated. The speech is very short. It took him less than 7 minutes, which I'm trying to make mine less than 7 minutes as well. But it was only only 701 words. The address had a short introduction, then talked mostly about the war and bringing the Union together. Next slide. Part of the address included the State of the Union address. Now, the State of the Union address for President Lincoln amounted to one sentence. That sentence is printed here on the slide. The progress of our arms, upon which all else chiefly depends, is well known to the public as to myself, and it is, I trust, reasonably satisfactory and encouraging to all. With high hopes for the future, no predictions in regard if it is ventured. That was the State of the Union address in 1865. For the most part, the crowd was celebratory that day. They knew that the war was about to end, but Lincoln did not share that same feeling. He did not seek to find blame nor to shame the Confederate soldiers who were also in attendance, but to reunite a divided nation. Next slide. Following the brief comment on the current condition of our country, Lincoln proceeded to the theme of his speech as he spoke about both sides of the contest, as he called the war. He noted, both parties deprecated war, but one of them would make war rather than let the nation survive, and the other would accept war rather than to let it perish. And the war came. Next slide. Neither party expected for the war the magnitude or the duration which it had already attained. Both read the same Bible and prayed to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. The Almighty has his own purposes. Next slide. Along with the Gettysburg Address, the second inaugural address is carved on the walls inside the Lincoln Memorial. To close his first inaugural address, as the Civil War was about to begin, Lincoln said, "I am loath to close. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection." And with similar unifying language, Lincoln closed his second inaugural address with these famous words, "With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives to us, to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in." Next slide. To bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. I hope we as board members can take this to heart and realize that we too are there to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for those who have borne the battle of this world as it is now. It may not be a war with arms, sometimes it is, but it is a war out there, and our students need us, the families need us, and we need each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Norton. Very timely and powerful. Appreciate that. Let's turn to our education highlight. Kelsey James, our Board Communications Coordinator.
Thank you, Chair. I am actually going to turn the reins over to USBE's Robert Austin, and I can invite him and our two guests to come sit at the table, and they will lead the presentation.
Thank you. Welcome. And if you could just each introduce yourselves. Robert, if you want to introduce the team.
You bet. Good morning. I'm Robert Austin. I'm the Humanities Coordinator here at the State Board of Education, and I'm joined by...
I'm Joanna Sorensen, pre-K through 6th grade social studies specialist.
So I'm so fortunate to have an elementary specialist, and I get to focus on secondary social studies. We're delighted today to introduce Wendy Rexatzit, who will introduce Annika Rao. It's always great to have a real student here. Wendy coordinates with the Division of State History the Utah History Day program, which is kind of like a science fair meets performance art meets all kinds of incredible experiences. The Utah History Day program was really on its last legs, and then this incredible asset to the state in the person of Wendy came to work at the State Division of History, and Utah History Day is an amazing program.
Wendy won't say it, but they are always in need of judges for History Day. And speaking from experience, it is incredible, incredible experience. So let us know if you're interested in that.
So Wendy Rexhatset, welcome.
Thank you so much for having us. And thank you for that introduction. That's so kind. I am a historian. I'm with the Utah Division of State History, and I've been actually working with the National History Day program for over 15 years, not just in Utah, but also in Colorado. Utah's National History Day program was created at Utah State University in 1980, and we have been operating continuously in Utah since that time. You may recognize the program from its earlier name. It was called Utah History Fair for most of those years until we came to the Division of State History, and then we changed our name to align better with the national organization. So National History Day is a little bit like science fair. Students engage in a historical research project, and then they present their findings in a series of tournaments. In Utah, we have regional History Day contests in March, and then we have a state contest in April. Then in June, we send our top entries to compete at the National History Day contest, which finally this year will be returning to an in-person week-long competition in Washington, D.C. Our students at Nationals will compete against about 3,000 other students from all over the country. It's very competitive and rigorous. At Nationals last summer, 6 Utah projects were selected to be exhibited through the Smithsonian museums, and 4 Utah projects received national contest awards. And then just 2 weeks ago at our own state capitol, we hosted a contingent of our national contest delegates at History Day on the Hill, which is part of Utah History Month. So National History Day is really, it's all about engaged teaching and learning. Our students discover history by actually doing history. And in the process, they meet many of the targets that are outlined in Utah's Portrait of a Graduate. They develop mastery and historical literacy by researching a topic in depth. They develop critical thinking skills by analyzing historical documents, artifacts, and images, by investigating different points of view and drawing conclusions based on evidence. They develop digital literacy by learning to research and identify credible information on the internet. They develop communication skills and creativity as they present their work in the NHD creative categories. We offer exhibits, documentaries, performances, papers, and websites. They meet course standards in social studies, English language arts, and other disciplines. And the best part, they get to have their own aha moments about how the world that they know is the product of choices made and actions taken in the past. In sum, they build research, analysis, writing, and presentation skills that will benefit them throughout school, college, and career. Now, I'm so happy to introduce to you Anika Rao. She's a senior at West High School.
Hi, so I qualified for the national NHD competition in 8th grade and last year, which was my junior year of high school. So as Wendy said, one of the benefits of NHD is that it allows students to choose their project category out of several options. So in both years, I opted to combine my passion for writing and my desire to learn more about my culture by writing papers on modern Indian history. So in 8th grade, I wrote a paper on British India's freedom struggle, and last year I wrote a paper on the partition of India. It's not often that students have the opportunity to delve into a single topic that interests them, especially at the elementary and middle school levels. I'm interested in global politics, so I chose a topic that allowed me to study the history of government. I practiced the research and critical thinking skills I gained from NHD in my high school classes, including my current IB higher level history class. So I have also learned about the power of history through NHD. While writing my paper on the partition of India, I challenged my preconceptions about this controversial topic in Indian and Pakistani history. The intensive research process helped me avoid defaulting to confirmation bias while developing my arguments. I also learned the extent to which past events have implications for the present. The partition of India, for example, resulted in religious nationalism and ethnic conflict that plague the Indian subcontinent to this day. A greater emphasis on learning from history can help us avoid repeating past mistakes. Although last year's national competition was virtual, I had the opportunity to travel to Washington, D.C. in 2019. One of my favorite aspects of this experience was integrating myself into a community of students who share a passion for history. Each state and country brought their own buttons representing their region, and one of our goals as students was strategically collecting each button. I made friends through this experience who I'm still in contact with to this day. Finally, none of this can happen without Wendy and the Utah History Day team and the volunteer judges. And they just really provide us with an amazing opportunity, and their work has made my experience truly transformative. So thank you.
Thank you so much to Wendy and Anika for that wonderful presentation. I'm going to turn it over just for a minute or two to board members Wood and Norton, who had the opportunity to look at some of the exhibits at the History Day on the Hill event that happened 2 weeks ago now, the same day as our legislative breakfast. So I'll turn it over to them.
Thank you, Kelsey. So for this opportunity, I was first actually exposed to National History Day after moving back to Utah after a decade in the Northwest. My sister invited me to watch her children present at the Utah State History Day at Brigham Young University. Over the years, I observed their reenactment of the pounding of the Golden Spike at Promontory Point, their documentaries on the history of pasteurization and the story of Martha Hughes Cannon, and even participated in my first trip to Washington, D.C. after my nieces and nephews qualified for National History Day. A few years later, I watched my own 8th grade son build the Berlin Wall out of styrofoam blocks and engineer a way to have it come crashing down as the voice of President Ronald Reagan played in the background, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." I loved my experiences, the doting aunt and the nervous mom, but I attended the Capitol more as a curious onlooker, wondering how these students had chosen their topics and symbolism behind their presentations. I was so impressed by the presentation of 2 middle school students from Cache County. The display was beautiful, but I was particularly interested in the depth of their symbolism. Their project was on the Japanese internment camps, and in the center of the display was a scale that's shown here on the board, with 2 Japanese bowls on each side. One side, labeled internment, was loaded down with small grains of white rice, and these girls explained to me that those small grains represented each of the Japanese Americans who'd been unfairly sentenced in an internment camp. The other bowl, labeled freedom and liberty, represented the promises that should have been granted to these American citizens. The bowl was empty there on the ground. The final bit of symbolism was that the empty bowl was actually a kintsugi bowl. Kintsugi is the Japanese art of putting broken pottery pieces back together with gold, built on the idea that in embracing flaws and imperfections, you can create an even stronger, more beautiful piece of art. I enjoyed learning from these young women and seeing what they had learned through their in-depth study of this subject. I think that the symbolism of kintsugi is an incredible way to think about the history of our nation. We recognize that there are parts of our nation's history that certainly show flaws and imperfections, but we don't hide the flaws. We learn from them and create an even stronger country that has learned from its mistakes.
Thank you. I too had the opportunity of being a parent of a history fair student back in those days, and what a great experience that was. While we have the picture of the falsely interned up there, I spent quite a bit of time at that presentation as well. I have a great affinity for the Asian culture, and so there was so much symbolism going in there. I don't know if you can see them. Maybe if you could zoom back in again. On the sides, there are a number of pictures, and the time, in the Asian culture, details and time are very, very much part of that culture, and I noticed these girls had included that. Some of those pictures have been matted on makisu, which is a bamboo rolling mat, and had been cut to size. Down below, you can see the spoons that are in there. It was just visually beautiful. And then when you read the stories, it was heartbreaking. And it was such a great contrast there and it really, to me, spoke to many of the trials that our Asian American citizens have experienced, the heartbreak that they hold inside and the beautiful exhibit that they have on the outside. Another interesting opportunity we had to stop by was a couple of girls who did some research, or their research was on women in the space race, and how at that time that they, in so many of the testing things that had happened, they far exceeded their male counterparts, and yet were unable to go into space because they were women. And I thought, you know, there's so many of these experiences that have happened, but just like you said, we're learning through history, and that, you know, that we can go forward and make a better nation because of these wonderful things you're learning and teaching the rest of us about.
Thank you so much to our wonderful guests, along with Board Member Wood and Norton, for sharing their experience. I know if board members have any questions, either Wendy, Anika, and then, of course, Robert and Joanna are at your service to answer those for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelsey, and to Joanna, Robert, Anika, and Wendy, thank you so much, and our board members as well. I'll just add, my house in North Orem was built over a former internment camp, and it had Japanese, also Italian and German, and an ugly chapter. Any questions for our team? Okay, thank you so much, especially Anika. It is always great to hear from one of our students, so thank you for coming. Oh, did we have, I'm sorry, Brent?
Sorry.
Member Straight.
Yes, I'm sorry for this awkwardness. In regard to this, I'd really like, as a teacher, we did History Day as well, in 11th grade U.S. history as you're in. One thing I really liked about the program is there were multiple skills that resulted from that: reading, writing, research. Could you talk to that a little bit more?
So, yeah, for sure. I learned so much from my experience doing History Day, especially because I started at a younger age when I was in 8th grade. So I went into high school kind of already knowing how to, use those research skills, critical thinking skills, citing things in the correct format, which I know is the bane of many high schoolers' existence. So, yeah, I went into high school with those skills, and just beyond that, I kind of talked about this earlier, but you just learn so much about the power of history in addition to these skills that you can apply to other subjects, that I think it's just such a great experience for kids. And the purpose of education is to engage students and, make them interested in what they're learning. And so allowing them to choose their own topic that they really get to hone in on and focus on, and, topics that are really significant to them. So for me, it was learning about the history of, my culture and my country. I think that really engages students. So those are some of the skills that I learned.
Yeah, I can add just a little. You might be surprised to know that by doing a History Day project, students will meet over 25 objectives in English language arts that relate to literacy, reading complex texts, writing, and it's scaled to whichever grade that they are doing that. So we have all those resources available for students. It is a powerhouse. So project-based learning can be really effective, and it bundles a lot of skills in a way that keeps students engaged through a project that they're interested in working on, and they kind of develop their own momentum.
And if I could just add, the value of Utah's online library was absolutely amazing in helping students to meet those goals and objectives. So thank you so much. I appreciate your answering my question.
Thank you.
All right, thanks very much again. Great to have you with us. I neglected to note our superintendent is ill and is not with us, but I think is joining from home. So we wish speedy recovery to Superintendent Dixon.